Here are the topics that will be covered within the Supreme Court revision video. This video is going to focus on judicial restraint and the Supreme Court's role as guardian of the Bill of Rights. Judicial activism is a term which lacks precise definition and is surrounded by confusion. Arguably, the most objective definition is that the judicial activism is the overriding by the Supreme Court of a state or congressional law, or the reversal of one of the court's own precedents. Thus, when defined, judicial activism can be practiced by both conservative and liberal justices. However, many people believe that judicial activism is an approach to judicial decision-making which holds that judges should use their position to promote desirable social ends. For example, they lead the way in reforming American society. Is judicial activism something negative? It is the job of the court to limit the political branches of government if they step outside their constitutional powers. This means that the judiciary will have to declare laws passed by elected officials unconstitutional, as well as putting a stop to unconstitutional actions taken by the president. The concern is that the courts might appear to be leading the way in public policy making. This is going to be looked at later on in the video. However, judges know that if their decisions stray too far or too long outside the mainstream of public opinion, then they may be forced to moderate their decision or lose their only true method of enforcement, the acceptance of their decisions as legitimate by the populace. On the other side of the coin, there is judicial restraint, but this is not mutually exclusive to judicial activism. Judicial restraint is an approach to judicial decision-making which holds that judges should defer to the legislative and executive branches of government. It should also defer to the precedent which has been established by previous court decisions. This is where the court is more inclined to accept the views and actions of elected officials. A court exercising judicial restraint puts a good deal of importance into what is called stare decisis, which is the principle that judges should look past precedent as a guide whenever possible. Under this principle, once a matter has been decided in a case, it forms a precedent that should not be overturned except under pressing and changed circumstances. Under judicial restraint, Roe v. Wade cannot be fully overturned, but there can be small changes made to restrict access to abortion, as we have seen recently under President Trump. A court exercising judicial restraint is more likely to defer to the elective, legislative, and executive branch. The court following the approach of judicial restraint is therefore less likely to declare acts of Congress or the state legislators as unconstitutional. The Supreme Court protects civil rights and liberties. It is the ultimate court of appeal for people who believe their rights have been infringed. It can strike down laws passed by the federal or state legislators if they do not comply with the Bill of Rights or other constitutional rights. It can rule actions taken by federal or state executives as unconstitutional if they infringe the citizens' constitutional rights. Before I go through the Bill of Rights and how the Supreme Court protects them, pause the video here and test yourself on how many Bill of Rights you can remember. There are many examples of where the Supreme Court has protected civil rights and liberties of the American people. This has often been seen when the courts are adopting judicial activism, for example, Roe v. Wade in 1973. In regard to the First Amendment, the court must strike a balance between avoiding an established religion, one adopted by that particular state, and allowing citizens to practice their religion freely. In Burwell v. Hobby Lobby Stores in 2014, the court struck down part of the Affordable Care Act of 2010, which made family-run businesses contribute to health insurance that might be used for contraception. Another part of the First Amendment is the freedom of speech. Political donations are seen as an expression of free speech and have been protected by the court. In the Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission of 2010, the court controversially ruled that corporations, unions, and associations had the same rights to free speech as individuals, so they could make political donations and political adverts in the same way as an individual. The Second Amendment is all about gun rights. Liberals interpret this as a collective right to bear arms within a militia. Conservatives claim the amendment provides an individual right to bear arms, and most argue that this would be infringed by any form of gun control. In the District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008, the court struck down a law banning handgun ownership and ruled that the amendment does not confer to individual right to bear arms. The Eighth Amendment focuses on the death penalty. The death penalty is legal in 31 states in America. The Supreme Court rulings have focused on deciding what constitutes as cruel and unusual punishment. In Bays v. Rees in 2008, the court ruled that lethal injection was not considered cruel and unusual punishment, therefore it could be used for executions. When evaluating the role of the Supreme Court in protecting the rights and liberties of US citizens, it is important to remember the Supreme Court cannot guarantee that rights are protected. The court has no power of entrenchment and is dependent on public opinion and other branches of government to uphold its decisions. For example, when Brown v. the Board of Education was initially passed, it took another 10 years before segregation was fully outlawed in all schools in America. Supreme Court cannot contradict the Constitution. The 18th Amendment prohibited the sale and consumption of alcohol. However, isn't this an affront to individual civil liberties? A landmark ruling is a decision made by the Supreme Court that establishes a new legal principle or fundamentally changes the way in which the law is interpreted. These are among the most politically controversial judgments made by the court. Two of the most significant landmark rulings are Brown v. Topeka in 1954, commonly known as Brown v. the Board of Education, and Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015. I'm going to go through Obergefell and Hodges, but you should research Brown v. Topeka as you are expected to know at least two landmark rulings in detail for your exam. James Obergefell married his husband in Maryland, where same-sex marriage was legal, but in the state of Ohio, where same-sex marriage was illegal, they did not recognize their marriage. Obergefell made a legal challenge that reached the Supreme Court, which also considered several similar cases in the same rulings relating to the states of Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Like Brown v. Topeka, this judgment focused on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court ruled 5-4, with the majority arguing that the right to marry was fundamental, supported by the Equal Protection Clause. Obergefell v. Hodges legalized same-sex marriage across the US, giving same-sex couples the same rights as any others. It is also significant because the majority of justices took a loose constructionist approach and interpreted the Constitution in the context of a modern liberal idea about sexuality. A fundamental change was made to the US law by an unelected body, which is highly significant. Strict constructionists condemned the judgment as judicial activism and stated that the judges were legislating from the bench. The judgment horrified many Christian and conservative groups who viewed marriage as a union between men and women. Dissenting justices argued that the right to religious freedom was also being infringed upon by this particular ruling.